Well, hello and welcome back to the RevOps Charlie YouTube channel. And today we've got a really special edition where we're going to be talking about leadership, and not only just getting started in leadership, but getting started in leadership as a female leader. And I'm really pleased to welcome Jennie Parungao to the channel. Jennie is currently the VP of RevOps at gamehers. I want to pronounce that correctly, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But Jennie, welcome to the channel. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me here, Charlie. I'm very excited to talk more about this and my experience in the gaming space, and just like you said, being a leader.
Oh, fantastic. So maybe just a little bit of your history. I know that you've been at Shazam, TikTok, you've had roles in account management before moving over to operations. Maybe a little bit of that background. What was that transition from an account management role and then moving into an operational role like?
Yeah, I should preface by saying my first role out of college was as a financial analyst at Pepsi. And from there is where I then slowly started to transition into the more media ad tech space. But what I have found is obviously having that experience in finance has helped me throughout each step of the way in my career. So once I actually did dip my toes into account management, I found myself really wanting to know more about the intricacies of, when you're in traditional digital media and you're an account manager, most of the work you're doing is passed through to ad ops. So I always wanted to know, okay, like what is ad ops doing when I send them these tags? And it's this level of curiosity that throughout the way and throughout each step of my career as an account manager, I would continue to ask those questions. And it's really that curiosity, that wanting to understand, that then helped me to really transition into my role as a RevOps leader in the space. So I was doing the traditional account management at Shazam. I was part of the TikTok team when they first expanded into the US. And so it was a lot of the high growth type of environment where you are trying to grow accounts, but also manage them, but also figure out how to optimally manage them. And again, I think going back to how do each of the pieces work, that's really what I continue to, that's really what my approach continued to be, which, like I mentioned before, just helped me to ultimately transition into my role in RevOps, which, really started to take place as when I was in a company called FaZe Clan, which is a very big gaming and esports organization. I joined them back in 2019, right before COVID. And my initial remit was just meant to be sales ops. I came on specifically as a sales operations leader. But when we started to grow because of COVID and we kept hitting these unexpected heights with clients coming to us because no one really had anything else to do, we were met with this challenge of, okay, we have this size of a team. We need to bring on more teams. We need to somehow create the scalable infrastructure. And who is best equipped to do it? No one was best equipped to do it. So I kind of just stepped in because there was the need on the account management side to continue to, yes, we have to deliver to the clients. How we're going to do it, we're not sure. As account managers, we're going to have to figure this out ourselves. And so that's the path we originally that's the path we kept taking, is let's just figure this out. Let's just figure this out. During that time, I grew my team, my account management team, from 2 account managers to 4 or 5. And that was within the span of a year and a half. And it was essentially the work that I did during the period of time during COVID where, our headcount grew by 300%. I was behind the helm at figuring out how we're going to make it all work internally. And really the work that I did is what then elevated me into a wider remit, which was the wider VP of RevOps role, which I found to be to be honest, it was very similar to what I felt like I had been doing anyways in sales ops. Just like I said, the wider remit. And I think, now that it's announced that, hey, Jennie's overseeing the wider RevOps, I think it kind of gave people, it gave me the chance to actually be heard a little bit more as a leader versus just, disregarded by some of the teams who were probably thinking, okay, she's just in sales ops. This doesn't apply to me. But once I actually had an elevated title, I think it really helped in terms of having people hear me more.
So with that role, was that your first transition into leadership, or had you led a team before that?
At FaZe Clan was my very first foray into leadership and into management. Prior to that, I think my extent of leadership was an intern. But at FaZe Clan, because it was such a high growth company at the time when I joined it back in late 2019, there were just so many moving parts. And I think I just kind of was thrown into a management role off the bat. And then, like I said, once COVID hit, it really just expanded and took off from there.
And what was the makeup of your team for that first time leadership? How many people were in the team, and what were your sort of experiences of coming into that first time role?
It was interesting, right? Because I think when I came into the team at the time it was director of sales ops / head of account management, I think there was maybe a little bit of hesitancy with the existing team because I had kind of adopted them under my leadership, and I think there were some unwilling participants, which I have found to be the case a lot, where the duration or the tenure of certain employees makes them feel like they're above certain levels of management just simply based on the tenure. So in this particular instance where I was coming into this role, immediately managing 2 account managers that had already been on the team, it was a little bit tricky. It was difficult at first for me to, number one, establish a rapport with them. And I think one of the difficulties with that was because one of them was abroad. She actually not abroad. She eventually moved abroad, but she was on the East Coast and the rest of the team was on the West Coast. And so having that element of you have a team member that's working remote, and again, this is right before COVID, it was a little bit tricky to get this person on the same page. So even when it came to little things like we're going to change this process or how we're going to manage this client's deliverables is going to change a little bit, I was not seeing any results. It was like talking to a wall in one ear out the other. It was just very difficult to get any work done. And it took a lot of relationship building is what I believe led to the success, is really taking off that leadership hat and really putting myself in this person's shoes, not only from the instance of, hey, I'm your new manager, but also from the instance of she was also the only person on the team that was working remotely. Everyone else was based locally. So I think that also adds a little component of feeling separate from the rest of the group. So really, I spent a lot of time just having conversations with her, not even about work, right? Like for me, it was really about, let's just establish a relationship. And really, that's kind of how it grew from there, was establishing that rapport and genuinely establishing it, not just saying we're going to create this relationship just to create it. But I really do believe that putting the time and effort into that person and making them actually feel seen and heard is what really led to us being able to get to a place where she was, then being compliant with any of the changes that we were implementing.
And what was sort of the structure of that, weekly one-to-one, or is there kind of ad hoc, chats or communications? How did that play out?
It was both. Whenever I manage a team, I always make it a point to establish weekly one-on-ones and then make it a point to keep them on schedule and not cancel them. I think that's one of the biggest things is, I've been in their shoes. The teams that I manage, I've been in their exact shoes. I've been on the same exact career path and trajectory where you're starting off as a junior account manager, you're trying to navigate through and move your way up the ladder. I think where they failed, I think one of the things that really helped me work with them as I grew my team was them knowing that I have done the same exact thing that I'm asking you to do. And actually, one of my philosophies with my team was, I'll never ask you to do something I've never done. because there's a lot of monotonous, boring things that they hated doing. Silly things like expenses, for example, right? It's a necessary evil. You have to do it. And there were times where I would need the assistance of my team to help me with completing that. And I always told them, look, I'm never going to ask you to do something I've never done before. So I know you feel like you're above this, but it's a teamwork, it's collaboration. So I've been through all of this. And like I said, I think it's them knowing that I have been through all of this too is what ultimately helped me with that team.
Yeah. When you think back to previous managers that you've had, are there sort of lessons or experiences that you've had, either positive or negative, where you've brought that into your own sort of first leadership of going, I'm definitely going to do that, I'm definitely not doing that?
Yeah. That's actually how I framed how I was going to manage my team. Is I thought about all of the terrible, horrible managers I've had. And I've been blessed and lucky to have had a lot of really great managers and leaders, but then there's the select one or two who maybe were not my direct managers, but I saw the impact that their leadership had on the wider team. So I would look at, okay, for example, this person, this leader says they're going to do something by a certain date, but when that date comes, nothing is ever delivered. They actually forget that they said that. And then you just lose all credibility as, if they're your leader, you kind of start to lose faith in them, especially if it's if it's something that is repeated over and over again, where that's, it also then just becomes these false promises. So I would remember those instances where I would just make a mental note of, okay, if I say I'm going to do something, I better do it. And if I'm late with it, I need to at least communicate that to my team. And so the most important things for me when it came time to actually putting this framework together of how I want to be a leader that's actually listened to and respected is really actually being interested in my team. And again, having been through their shoes, that was really helpful for me. But also that level of accountability. And that's the other biggest thing that I made important with my team, that I prioritize with my team, is always be accountable. So if and when you are wrong, and inevitably you will be wrong at some point in time, how you handle that error will say a lot about you. And I had an account manager who made a pretty big, costly mistake that required us to hire a freelancer at X amount of dollars because of this error that this account manager made. And he initially wanted to put the blame on someone else on accident. He wanted to say, well, so-and-so said to do this, so I just did it. And, this mentality of finding someone else to blame is not how I approach my management style. And I would not expect my team to do that. So when he actually came and said that to me, I was actually, number one, very shocked. Number two, I gave him a very hard lesson in understanding the importance of accountability. And I made sure he made it a point to apologize to this individual on this production team and say, hey, this was my fault. I'm really sorry this oversight was my error. Here's how I will fix it. So it's this idea of taking responsibility and accountability for what you're doing. Then if you're in the wrong, providing the solution on how to fix it so that the project doesn't just stop there. It's, you now have a solution, which then again builds that credibility level for you in whatever role you're in.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent of 4 children, I try to not make too many similarities between parenting and managing. But I would say with kids, like, they look at what you do, not what you say. And so you can say, you need to be polite, you need to not swear, you need to whatever. But if you do those things, then that's what they learn from, not what you said. And it's exactly the same with leading a team. You want your team to be accountable. You want them to be on time. You want them to deliver on what they've committed to doing. But if you don't do those things, then that's what people are learning from. And you mentioned one-to-ones. Those are sacrosanct. You've got a team of 5 or 10 people. You've got your one-to-ones once a week or every 2 weeks. Those are immovable. And the moment that you start saying to your team, "Oh, can we push that? Oh, we haven't got much to talk about," then suddenly they're looking at you, at what you're doing, and not just what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. 100%. I used to have a manager who would always move my one-on-ones, and it always felt very discouraging because I think as a manager, it's easy to view those one-on-ones as you as a leader, you're just trying to get updates from your team, and you forget that your team is also looking at that one-on-one as an opportunity to ask you questions because you are always so busy. And so I definitely forgot that at times. And I was reminded of it when one of my account managers then would just consistently call me on my cell phone because I took away his opportunity to have a one-on-one to ask me these questions. I didn't realize that it was that important. And so he would then, during those weeks where I canceled the one-on-ones, I'd noticed that he would subsequently call me a lot more. And we would have these random, unscheduled chats about some of the questions he had. And it finally came to the head where I was like, is there something in particular that's going on this week, or you just have a lot more questions this week where you're calling me a lot more? And it kind of came to light that, well, you had to move the one-on-one, and so I didn't have a chance to actually bring these up to you when they came up. And that was the moment for me where it was this isn't just for you as the manager to get your updates, it's also for your team to move through and progress in the projects that they're working on at the designated time that we had mentioned. So I think that was a realization for me where, yes, this is a reminder that this is not just about you.
Yeah. I love the book Radical Candor, which I know some people take it slightly the wrong way. I'm not sure if you've read Radical Candor, but it's got some great sections about one-to-ones being just the most important part of the manager relationship. But it's the team members meeting, not the managers meeting. Like you say, it's not the opportunity for the manager to get an update. It's much more about your team member having guaranteed access to you for that half hour or hour, and opening up that session. It's much more about what's on your mind, how can I help, rather than extracting information from that individual.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. 100%.
And so thinking a bit about being a female leader, especially in that first role, were there any specific learnings that you had or challenges that you faced that you think were gender related?
I would say it didn't really come to light that it possibly could have been gender related until we were a few months into my more elevated role. And it really came to light for me when there was a specific incident where, again, FaZe Clan was the first time where I had been working with any type of production team, a formal production team where you're actually building video content that you're going to put on YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is, but you're creating branded content. And the whole process to me was very new and something I was still getting used to. Also, the budgets were something that I was getting used to as well, because I had not seen budgets of that size being put towards a custom content, a 60-second video piece in my career. At TikTok, it was very different. At Shazam, it was very different. So to have this type of revenue stream was new to me. And there was a particular incident where I was new to my VP of RevOps role, and I was concerned about the amount of money that production team was considering spending on a content piece. And I flagged it to my boss and I said, this doesn't make any sense. we've done a piece like this before at 1/8 of the price. So to see this new budget now with this new team is something is amiss here, and we should look into this. And I brought that up to my boss, and he said, okay, I'll look into it. I don't think he had time to look into it. So I then flagged it directly to the head of production team at the time. I didn't know this, but after I had flagged it to him, he then sent to my boss an email basically saying I was difficult to work with, and I don't know anything about production, and so why am I chiming in on these things? And turns out that my boss had already said something to him, and when my boss sent something to him, to this person though, it was received, he was very receptive to it. So what I ultimately found out was when I delivered the message, it was seen as being defiant, and I was then perceived as very difficult to work with because I disagreed. But apparently when my boss had delivered the same message to the same individuals and to the same team, it was an open conversation and things were fine. And what continued to happen though is throughout the rest of the time when I was there, whenever I would flag these things I had questions about, I would run it through my boss, and then I would run it directly to the team. And it was the same type of patterns and trends where if it comes from, my boss who was a male, it was perceived very differently. But if it came from me, or if it came from, and I had maybe 3 other female account managers on my team, if it came from them, it could have been the same bit of information. If it came from them, it was usually ignored, or they were then perceived as difficult to work with. So and again, it's possible that this could just be specific to the teams or specific to, a subset of individuals. But I think we hear a lot about the role of women in gaming, whether you are a leader in gaming or if you are a gamer, a consumer who games. The sentiment is always the same, which is really the women are treated differently. And we see that on the consumer side, where there's a lot of videos going viral of females who get harassed or bullied by male counterparts while they're streaming. And on the leadership side of things, you see it every day, whether it's someone getting promoted above you, someone getting paid more than you, even though you have the same level of role, but you continue to see these patterns and trends. And I think on one hand, you do question, okay, is this actually a gender thing, or is it, something that could be linked to, what a lot of people will call as being, the unconscious bias of genders in the workplace.
And it must be very frustrating in terms of like how you deal with that, because on the one hand you can just let it lie and go, don't rise up to it, but in which case you're almost sort of reinforcing that behavior, or you do flag it, and then you risk that being difficult to work with. You're almost in a no-win situation. How do you advise people that are in that situation about what path to take?
Yeah, I think it's really important to do well. Number one, I don't think that should be viewed as the deterrent for saying something. So for example, in my role at FaZe Clan, where again, overspending was a really big thing that I was paying attention to, because as the head of RevOps, I oversee the COGS, I oversee margin. And for me, when I see margin dipping below a certain level, and I can point to the exact instances of why, and that continues to get ignored, it was really important for me to still continue to flag those things. So, to immediately answer your question, I think the most important thing is don't take it personal. Number two, don't let it deter how you still approach your role as a leader at your company. Because if you all of a sudden see that as being the ceiling or as the hurdle you have to jump over, then at that point you're kind of holding yourself back, because now you've put this invisible hurdle in front of you and you're calling it a gender bias. The gender bias doesn't always exist. And really, the only way to find out where it exists is just keep pushing and keep doing your role, regardless of what you think might be happening outside you. And I think the other thing that I found really impactful for me was knowing when to escalate something, right? You don't want to be this girl who cried wolf by flagging every little instance, because now you're seen as that issue was not that important. If she's going to continue to flag all these minor instances, well, then when you actually do have something that's really important, they're going to overlook that, because by that point you've escalated 20 issues in the past 10 days. So it's really important to be cognizant of how you're of what you're bringing up, how you're bringing it up, and ultimately making sure that you have, number one, the backing and support of someone who already has influence within the company, but number two, that you have the data and the facts to verify what you're saying. So again, going back to the example of overspending on production pieces, I wouldn't just tell our CFO, hey, we're overspending on production pieces, and leave it at that. I had a history of reports. I would have very detailed data over a period of time to indicate, hey, during this time frame, this is where we were. Now over here, we're here. So have the data and have the hard evidence to actually back up what you're saying, because otherwise, again, going back to being the person who cried wolf, you don't want that. You want to make sure that what you're putting out there has some credibility and substance behind it, whether that comes from, again, the support of an executive who already has influence at the company and can help back up your claim, or if it's hard data. I think for me, what I had to just keep remembering was I'm not going to fight this battle alone. I think that was the most important thing I had to remember, was this cannot be a battle that's fought alone. It needs to have the backing of, like I said, the data or someone who already was influential at the company.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into that a little bit more in terms of that other person that's influential. What kind of person do you mean there, and who was your, I don't know, mentor or sponsor in that role?
Yeah. So for me, it happened to be, well, at my company, or in my professional history, I had worked at an ad tech company called Share This, and after that, I worked at Shazam. And my boss at Share This is who actually is the one that kind of, by proxy, he ended up being my mentor, but he would go into different companies, and as he was going to build out the sales teams at different companies, found that they had the same need that I filled. So he kind of plucked me and took me along after Share This, he went to Shazam. 6 months later, he brought me over to Shazam. Shazam was then bought out by Apple in 2018, which is when I went to TikTok. He went to FaZe Clan as the CRO. And again, 6 months later, asked me if I could leave TikTok to go to FaZe Clan and kind of help him build out the account management team there. And so throughout that time, by that point, we had known each other for about 7 years. We had worked together for about 6 years. And so he was very familiar with what I can get done, how I approach work, the level of dependability and reliability that I had. And so in him having already gained this level of trust in me from the fact that we had worked together for so long, he then became kind of the person that I went to when I needed these things, when I needed, like I say, the support of someone who has influence in the company. So in that sense, I was very blessed to kind of have it handed to me on a silver platter, in a sense. But even if he were not there, let's say he did not exist and it was really up to me to kind of figure it out. There was a woman who was an advisor at FaZe, and she and I became very, very close. She's a very similar professional career track where she was doing ad tech and the digital media side of things, and had done that for most of her career. So really understood the commercial operations side of it and what was required for on the RevOps side of things. So she and I became very, very close during our time at Phase, and she's someone that I still look to as a mentor. But she eventually, for a time, was the COO at Phase Clan. So having established this relationship with her was also very critical for me in terms of getting things escalated or getting things moved along or pushed along.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, even if you don't need to rely on those relationships, just knowing that they're there and that's kind of a bit of a safety net, it gives you the confidence in terms of how you're communicating with your own team, because you know that you've got that relationship with that sponsor or mentor.
Exactly. It's someone you can bounce ideas with at a high level. So if I had ideas about, should we cut our budgets in this area? Should we consider opening this revenue stream? She was someone that I was able to just throw ideas back and forth with to get her candid feedback. That's what I thought was very important and valuable with her, is she gave direct feedback. She was very open and honest and just kind of gave it to me straight when I said, is this a good idea? And she, sometimes she'd be like, no, this is a bad idea. She would then give me context because, it turns out I didn't have the full picture in a lot of instances. But like you said, having this ally, having this person, regardless if they're if they're senior to you or not, it's someone who you can bounce ideas with and really get true open feedback on some of the things you might want to bring up.
So we talked a little bit about maybe other people's perception of you as a female leader. Are there any sort of advice that you'd give to people about being a female leader, managing the difference between managing men and managing women? Were there different things that sort of experiences you had about how you handle those interactions differently?
Yeah, I would say, I try to not create the difference. And I think that's something that maybe was very effective on me growing up. Is my parents are Filipino, and in the Philippine community, it's very common for the females to be the breadwinners. And so in my family, it was no different. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a machinist. And so I was raised with this very strong female figure and this very strong female driving force. So to me, there was no difference. And to me, to be honest, I didn't notice a difference until I got, into the gaming space where things were very blatantly different. And so again, I don't like to use that difference as a crutch. So when it comes to how I manage my team directly, I don't treat it any differently. And I think it's important to not treat it differently, because that can, at least in my opinion, probably perpetuate the situation. So I treat my management style and my leadership style as just it's very consistent across the board. I don't really look at the gender component. I think there are differences, though, when you are on the lower end of things, as a leader, and if you are trying to convince or discuss certain topics with upper management, I do think that there could potentially be a difference. And again, in my role in gaming, majority of the leaders in the C-suite were all male. And how I approached, let's say, meetings with them, for example, I was always prepared. I never entered a meeting without knowing what the objective of the meeting was, what we were going to discuss, but also what are some of the things that I might want to bring up, and then what are subsequently the data points that I can bring up as support to my statement or claim. So again, I think really the difference in how I managed and approached it was really in how I perceived upper management and how they might treat, subconsciously, how they might treat genders differently.
Yeah. And I think whilst all of these are different, obviously got sort of gender inequality on one side, then racial differences, cultural differences. And then I also think age as well, especially if you're a young manager coming in and you're managing people that are significantly older than you, then that can cause a challenge as well. Ultimately, it comes back to doing a good job, being consistent, being accountable, and like you say, having the data to back it up. So it's not just your opinion. And then ideally having some form of role model, mentor, sponsor that's there providing a little bit of air cover to you as you're going through that role.
Yeah, exactly.
And as we come towards the end of our conversation, RevOps is all about getting rid of silos. It's all about aligning across teams. So what's been your experience moving from a sort of account management and sales operations into more of a broader function, and how you align with different teams? How do you build rapport with legal or with finance or with HR and these different functions?
I think the most important thing is to speak their language. And again, going back to the career trajectory I've been on, where I started off as a financial analyst. So I at least have, and that was a while ago, but I at least have the basic understanding of what needs to be discussed and what the finance team actually cares about. And when it comes to the legal team, again, I became very familiar with contracts, but in my conversations with these different teams, and actually how I approach my role in leadership in RevOps is really, my process is, in a new role, I will sit with every single team. And a lot of times from the CEO, or even, they'll be like, why do you need to sit with them? There's some confusion because traditionally people don't see the need for someone in RevOps to be speaking to someone in legal. I think that's something that people don't think makes sense, but I still do it because it does make sense in RevOps. But I make it a point to sit with everybody and sit with all the different teams, and I understand their PTRs, which are their preferences, traditions, and requirements in how they do their day-to-day jobs. So, number one, I want to meet them and I want to establish this personal working relationship with them. But then I make sure that this meeting is about them. I want to know, in their time working with the sales team or with the account management team, what have been some of their pain points? And on top of that, what are the things that they need? So I'll tell you a story. When I was going about this in my role at FaZe Clan, I was meeting with someone in finance, and when I sat with her and I was asking her these questions, she was genuinely shocked because she said, nobody has ever asked me these things before, but there's a lot of things that I've been wanting to bring up, like the fact that we haven't been submitting invoices and I can't seem to track down the information on who we should be invoicing. And that one meeting just blew my mind because I thought, wow, we're not invoicing, which means we don't have the cash flow coming in. And all somebody had to do was sit and ask this person something. And I think for her, she did not feel empowered to dig or find out the who's who, because she didn't know the who's who. She didn't know who to go to for questions like, who should we be invoicing? And they're so simple to fix, right? They're like, for me, when you're connecting the dots, a lot of things are so simple to fix. Like the invoicing situation, that's very simple. We just implement a step where we're just having an invoice request process, something very simple, which has such a massive impact. And in this case, it was impacting cash flow for quite some time, which is a really big deal. It also made me question, how come no one caught the fact that we weren't bringing in cash, which then flags more of the bigger disconnects with the entire system. So having those soft skills, having the self-awareness, having the empathy and the ability to establish rapport with all the different teams by, again, having a genuine interest in them, what they do day to day, how they do it day to day, and what they would like to see day to day. That's the approach I always take. And it's been a very successful approach for me, because you're asking these questions of people who normally don't get asked these questions, and it empowers them. And when you can make their day to day smoother and better, I mean, that's something that always empowers and motivates me.
It's so easy, whether we're in RevOps, in sales, in marketing, finance, leadership, or an individual contributor, we sort of visualize a hub and a spoke, with us being the hub in the middle and all these other people that are around us. These other people, they're the hub in their own world and we're the spoke. And so going and having those empathetic conversations and saying, right, I'm the spoke to your hub. Like, what does a good day look like to you? What are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? Like, how do you measure what's working, what's not working? And then how can I, in our role, support you in that? Just by flipping it around, rather than what can you do for me, but what can I do for you? Suddenly you open up so much. And as a RevOps, this is where this breaking down these silos is so fantastic, and just not had that opportunity before this function exists.
Yeah, absolutely, completely. And again, even before I was officially in a RevOps role, and I was just doing the simple account management stuff, it was still the same approach, right? And it really is true, in my opinion, that the client success people, the account managers, are the ones at the forefront who are already doing RevOps, unbeknownst to them in some instances, but they're already doing the role of RevOps because they're the only ones connecting the dots. And, that's largely why I rely and am very proud of the experiences I've had as an account manager, because it is very true. And I do believe that. And I do believe too that, my ability to have been able to establish those relationships earlier on in my career within account manager has helped me as I go through this new pathway of RevOps, because, it's the same idea of connecting the dots, albeit with different teams, but you're still working towards the same path of alignment and efficiency.
Well, it's been fantastic for us to chat. I've got a couple of other questions, maybe just to help people that are listening in. Is there anything that you've read or watched recently that you recommend, whether it's work related or not?
Man, is there anything that I've read? Well, to be honest, I did see your interview with Stephen Diorio. Am I saying his name?
Yeah.
I watched that. I watched your podcast, your episode with him, and I actually found that to be very, very helpful for me, because in tandem, I'm also in the process of reading his book. And he touches on a lot of things, because for me, what I'm finding now is having to explain the value of RevOps. I think it's something I'm still having difficulties with, and specifically how to explain it to people in the gaming industry who are already, maybe biased against listening to me, but also don't feel like they need RevOps. And so I've found that your conversation with him, as well as his book, has been very, very helpful for me to articulate the value in a more practical way.
Yeah, it's a great book, and the strategic value of revenue operations, not tactical building commission plans and territory plans, but this is the system by which we generate revenue. Like, what's more strategic than that? So definitely,
Right.
I'll put a link to that. Well, the interview, that's very kind of you to say, but also a link to the book into the show notes here. And then Jennie, how can people be helpful to you, and what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
You can reach me at on my LinkedIn. I am very passionate about making an impact and helping young employees or young people who aspire to either be in gaming or want to know what it's like to be in gaming. I'm very, like I said, passionate about helping them. So, if anybody has questions about the gaming space, or even, my experience in being a leader in the space, feel free to reach out.
That's awesome. Well, I'll put your LinkedIn details into the show notes as well. Jennie, thank you so much for sharing your experience of coming from sort of an individual contributor role into your first management leadership role, especially as a female leader. And I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of value and insights that you've shared. Thanks very much, and look forward to speaking again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good one.